Hey, it's John, and welcome to the interview. Today, I'm joined by Lynne Twist, who is a speaker and author of the best-selling book, The Soul of Money, Transforming Your Relationship with Money and Life. She has shared her passion on stage with some of today's biggest thought leaders, including Oprah Winfrey and the Dalai Lama, to name a few. And today, we're going to talk a little bit about our relationship with money and how it affects us, as well as some of Lynne's most exciting stories as a fundraiser. She's raised millions of dollars for important causes around the world. So, Lynne, pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for spending some time.
Thank you, John. It's a delight to be with you.
Yeah, awesome. Well, let's just let the listeners know a little bit about your background, maybe your upbringing. Like, were you always this person who wanted to make a difference in the world, or what was that like growing up for you?
Well, I think my parents were a huge influence, as everybody's parents are on them, but mine were a pretty good influence. My mom was a kind of, at that time, you would call her a civic leader. She was the head of the auxiliary this and the auxiliary that. That was the term that was used at that time. And I grew up in Evanston, Illinois, in an integrated school system. So my father was a musician, so we had a lot of interest in being with people of color. We didn't call them that then, but so I kind of grew up in a family that was thinking about the world. And then when my father died, I was just turning 13, and he died of a heart attack very suddenly at age 50. And it was a shock for me, and I became very, at that time I would call it religious. We were Catholic because my dad died, and I didn't understand why, and I wanted answers. But now I would say I that was the beginning of my spiritual path, because religion was all I knew. But I now realize that's when I realized that about my inner life, you could say, and that led me to all kinds of things in high school. I was president of this and that, and got involved in all the stuff that was something that you would have called now service, and then I was lucky enough to have a relationship with Buckminster Fuller, the great humanist and thinker, and called the grandfather of the future in the 20th century. And he just totally inspired me because he lived a life that was an experiment. Could one little individual make a difference that would impact all humanity? That was his mantra. That was his dharma. That was his goal. And I just loved Bucky. And Buckminster Fuller, and then the old EST training, if you know what that was. It's now called Landmark.
Landmark, yep. I've been through that.
Kind of woke me right up out of whatever it was I was in. And I became very involved in ending world hunger through the Hunger Project, which Buckminster Fuller and Werner Erhard kind of collaborated in creating. And that took me all over this beautiful world, working on ending world hunger. I've ended up in India and Bangladesh and Namibia and Ethiopia and all over sub-Saharan Africa. Worked with Mother Teresa very closely, was at Nelson Mandela's inauguration, really got involved in the big global issues of our time. Feel so grateful for that. And now work with indigenous peoples of the Amazon through a whole series of mystical events that took me to the Amazon rainforest to work with the Achuar people. So I've had what I call myself a pro-activist rather than an activist, because I'm an activist for, not against.
I like that.
I'm very in touch with my vision for the world, and I know what's in the way, but I don't attack what's in the way. I do what I can to dismantle it or hospice its natural death. So I call myself a pro-activist and someone who's lived what I call a committed life, where my big, giant commitments, ending world hunger, preserving the Amazon rainforest, empowering women and girls, those are big commitments, and they get you out of your life starring you and into a life of service and contribution, which is way more fun. So that's a long answer to your short question.
That's beautiful. Yeah, wow. Some big problems you're going after there. That's awesome. And then you founded this company called the Soul of Money Institute. Maybe you want to just share with the listeners, where they can find out more, or what you all are doing there.
Yes. Well, the term Soul of Money Institute comes from a book I wrote called The Soul of Money.
Right.
And it's a little bit of a trick title because I think we all know money doesn't have a soul, but we do. And money is really a current that runs through every life. That's why it's called a currency. And we can give it soul. We can leave our imprimatur on it. We can really use it and move it towards the highest good. And given that I'm a a fundraiser and a philanthropist. When you're working on big issues, you need to raise a lot of money. I've raised hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars. And I've done that in all about 50 different countries and through fundraising, which is a very intimate interaction with a human being. I've learned a lot about people's baggage, their upsets, their anxiety, their incredible suffering around money. And it's not limited to people who have, modest means or less than they need. It's all the way from there, or even people who most people would call poor, all the way up to global billionaires are completely freaked out about money too. They have anxiety, they have upsets, they've got baggage, they're suffering in their relationship with money. It seems, inconceivable. But I've ended up working with some of our wealthiest families, as well as helping people figure out how to have a peaceful and transform relationship with money at any level. And so the Soul of Money Institute and the book really comes from the insights I gained from learning from people that I used to call poor, who have the most incredible wealth in inner life because they have to people that I used to call rich, who are struggling and upset and anxious. If the stock market goes down 1/10 of a something or other, they go nutty. So I realized that money is just this huge pariah in people's life. I mean, almost nobody has a healthy relationship with money. Most people have an anxious, upsetting relationship with money where they feel wrong and bad, and they feel like they should have done something they didn't do, or they shouldn't have done something they did do. And the anxiety and suffering around money, although it's quite silent, people don't talk about it a lot, is, most people wake up in the morning worried about it, go to sleep worried about it. It's like it grips them. So I really spent some time looking underneath that, looking at the root of that, and wrote a book about it, and then started an institute to help people find peace and freedom in their relationship with money, no matter how much they have or don't have. So that's the Soul Money Institute.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to link up your book as well as the website and all that here on this page as well. So yeah, a couple things you talked about, putting your money towards good. It's funny, I just did an interview with Paul Herman, who's the founder of the HIP Investor, and he actually created an index that measures the human impact plus profitability of a number of stocks and things like that. So it's interesting to think about your money as a currency and going through these companies, and some of those companies are probably doing better things with it than others, right? Mm-hmm. So interesting topic. And then yeah, everyone's worried about they're probably worried that they have a bad relationship with money, or they worry about it a lot. So what do you see as some of the major like toxic misconceptions or myths around money that people need to be aware of and then make some shifts around?
Well, there's a wonderful phrase from Buddha that kind of cleared it all up for me. Buddha said many wonderful things, but according to many people, he said, the source of all suffering is a lie. The source of all suffering is a lie. And when I heard that, I realized that the source of our suffering around money is really related to the lies that are embedded in the money culture. So the money culture itself, and lie is a strong word, but I use it to sort of get people's attention because, there's so many lies that the culture tells us about money and in the culture of money. So for example, we've forgotten that we invented money. We invented it. We made it up. We made it up to facilitate the sharing of goods and resources and to create equity for everybody in the community or village way back 4,500 years ago. And then that was before banking, where we were really just using it as a token for exchange. But then we started this whole kind of world of finance and banking, probably, I don't know how many years ago, but a substantial number of years ago. And then people started hoarding money because of interest. You could make money by doing absolutely nothing. In fact, by holding back the flow of money, you ended up with more money than everybody else, which kind of distorted the whole purpose of money, which was designed to ensure everybody was taken care of. And so that's and then from there, from interest in banking to derivatives and stock market, all the stuff that is so complex now, it's a huge part of the economy and nobody understands it, even the people who are, running it. So and I call that a series of lies in a way, because it's, it's like this mysterious, when it's also very simple. It could be so simple and everybody could have access. We've also given money so much power. We assign it its power. It has only the power and value we assign to it. So we, human beings, assign it its power. It's just paper or blips on a computer screen, but we've given it more power and more importance than human life in the society, in the culture. I'm talking about the culture now, the culture of money, the commercial culture. And everybody knows it's not more important than human life. However, we behave as if it is. So we will kill for money. We'll make a killing rather than a living, meaning that we'll do something that harms some species, destroys the environment, or marginalizes huge swaths of the human family. And if you make enough money doing that, it's considered legitimate and like you're a winner. When in fact, everybody knows that's not what any of us really want to do. It separates us from our own humanity. We have people making a dying rather than a living, which is doing something that demeans them, that's hideous, that has them gives them no dignity, no self-expression. Very few people just make a living, which is getting compensated for their service to the world. Not overcompensated, not undercompensated, but compensated for the service they're providing to the world. That's making a living. Very few people are doing that. It's either making a killing or making a dime. Making a dime is probably 80% of the population on planet Earth. And then we've made, when I say made money more important than human life, we won't speak to a ex-husband or an ex-wife or a mother or father over a money issue, or a sister or brother or a friend for years. That says money is more important than that relationship. We all know that that's not really true, but we behave that way. And that's, I would say, a lie. We've made money more important than the natural world. We will cut down an entire rainforest for money. We all know money's not more important than the capacity to breathe, or to have clean and safe water, or to have air to breathe for future generations. Yet we live in a society, a culture that will destroy the water, the air, life on earth for money. And we've made money more important than God or spirit. But the most powerful lie I think we tell is this thing called the lie of scarcity. I think that's what you're kind of getting at. And I say the lie of scarcity is a mindset, an unconscious, unexamined way of seeing the world, primarily in affluent nations, where we sort of unconsciously think there's not enough to go around and someone somewhere is going to be left out. Right. So that legitimizes accumulating way more than you need for you and yours, whoever you consider that to be, so that they're not left out, you and yours, which right. creates this us and them economy. And you'll help these people someday if you have way more than you need. You feel bad about it. In fact, you might even be accumulating at their expense a little bit or a lot. But this there's not enough to go around mentality is a belief system that's, I think, a lie, number one, and very, very damaging to the human psyche. And that what flows from that toxic myth, there's not enough, is toxic myth number two, I call more is better. More is better, more, if anything, more square feet in your house, more companies, more market share, more this, more that, more cars, more this, more that. So the more is better mentality is so intense, and we have so many messages telling us we're not okay, we're not enough until we accumulate or acquire something else, that we actually are kind of on this more is better manic trap that creates just enormous waste, has most of the stuff that we don't need in storage, or trying to fill up the Goodwill bin when it's overflowing. And then the third toxic myth is that's just the way that it is. So there's not enough is a mindset. More is better is a mindset. And that's just the way that it is a mindset. That is sort of the kind of central lie of a consumer culture that's turned us from citizens, which we used to be, and we used to call ourselves that, he or she who's responsible or stands for the well-being of the community, the state, the country, the world, into consumers, which means he or she who takes, depletes, diminishes, or destroys. And that's an ugly label for a human being, and it's a lie. That's not who we are. So all of this makes up a system in which we're swimming that has us have anxiety, upset, suffering in our relationship with money because we've kind of bought in to a system that actually doesn't serve us. Yeah.
Yeah. No, well said. Is it, and then I was at Conscious Capitalism this past month. I think you were as well. They talked a lot about short-termism in business and sort of this grinder, sort of short-term pressure cooker that a lot of companies are in to make money now to appease shareholders or, people involved in that business. Is that a big part of why you feel what you just shared is
Yes.
happening? Is the short-term, low attention, lack of a long-term vision kind of thing?
Right. It's a system that just has us do things we don't want to do. I mean, nobody wants to sacrifice the future for tomorrow,
Right.
or today. And we, the whole thing, money comes into existence as a form of debt at the very beginning. So the whole system's based on debt, as you know. The every dollar comes into existence with interest attached. So there's less money in circulation than there is owed. So the whole system is a deficit system, and the system has to grow or it'll collapse on a finite planet. It's non-viable. We cannot continue like this. So capitalism and conscious capitalism is really wonderful. I've joined the board there, and I was there too and spoke at that conference. Capitalism is part of the problem. Thank God there's people who are saying, while we're still stuck in this system, let's make it as conscious as we can make it. But even the people running conscious capitalism, I know very well since I just joined the board, are really realizing we have to come up with a win-win-win system instead of a win-lose system. And capitalism right now, as it gets more conscious, is much better for us. But ultimately, I think we need a system that actually allows everybody to win, and that you can't advance without having everybody else advance, rather than you advance at the expense of everybody else. That's going to be a big change. But Buckminster Fuller predicted in 1976 that in 50 years, our economic system would be so dysfunctional and so off and so inconsistent with human values that it would begin to disintegrate and fall apart. And he said we would go into such obscene debt, which is exactly where we are, that eventually the whole thing would collapse. And I'm not a doomsday person, I'm a possibility person, but I know that in some cases things need to fall apart for them to be recreated in a different set of assumptions. Because the set of assumptions that there's not enough to go around, I say is not actually true. That's a lie, that there is enough for everyone everywhere to have a healthy and productive life. I learned that from Bucky Fuller, and I've learned that from Indigenous people, and I've learned that from working in the environmental movement. So when you know that there's enough to go around, you can create a different system that allows everybody to flourish. And I think we need to do that.
So I like the phrase that you mentioned, I think it was on one of your talks, where you talked about money is like water. And you talk about it, you mentioned that in this interview too, it's a currency, right? Like a current flowing down a river. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that and kind of elaborate on that for people?
Well, that gives me the opportunity to tell a story, a fundraising story, which is where I came to that realization.
We'll do this 2 questions in one then.
Yeah. So when I was a young fundraiser for the Hunger Project many years ago, I was a little nervous to talk to anybody who had a lot of money.
Sure.
And we got an inquiry from a company in the Midwest. I won't say which company it was, but at that time it was the largest food company on earth. And they wanted to make what they called a substantial, or maybe it was significant, contribution to our work to end world hunger. And I thought, oh, yay. So I was dispatched to go meet with the CEO of the largest food company on earth. Now, at the same time, this exact same company, which I will not name, had been caught in a really nasty, ugly scandal, and their stock was plummeting, really, really plummeting, and they were in big trouble. And it was very visible, their problem. So I went to this company in the Midwest. I went up the elevator to the top of this gigantic building to meet with the CEO. I was scared to death. I had a breakfast meeting was supposed to be 7:30, I remember. And it was termed breakfast meeting. I got there was no breakfast. I'm sitting in front of this guy. He's sitting with windows behind him, just like the windows behind me, only the sun was rising behind him. So he was backlit, you know what I mean? So I couldn't see his face. I couldn't see his eyes, actually. The sun was rising right behind him, beautiful top of the tallest building in that city. Incredible view. And for some reason, he was sitting on that side of the desk and he had me on the other side. And I had a conversation with him, which was so unsatisfying. I talked about ending world hunger and particularly our work in Africa and India and places like that. But I couldn't ever see his eyes. And he pulled out the desk drawer on his side of the desk, this big giant desk, and pulled out a check for $50,000 that was already made out to the Hunger Project. And I remember him pushing it across the desk with his fingers kind of like this, from his side to my side of the desk. And this was after I was speaking for about 10 minutes. He didn't say anything. He just pushed this across. So
really weird, huh? Can't see him. He doesn't say anything.
I couldn't see him. He didn't say anything. I looked at the check and I felt when it came from his side of the desk across to my side of the desk, the guilt and shame of the company, like a dump from this huge scandal they were in. Yeah. And no commitment to ending world hunger, no engagement with me. I couldn't even see this guy. I took the check, put it in my briefcase. He stood up and reached out of his shadowy, cardboard cutout figure and shook my hand, meaning it's time for you to leave. So I did. And I went, got on a plane. It was early in the morning and I had a meeting in New York that night in Harlem, in a Harlem church basement. Oh. That was my next thing. I got in a Midwestern storm. It was, it took me hours to get to New York from where I was. When I got to New York, it was raining like mad. I got to the church where I was supposed to do a presentation, a fundraising presentation at a Harlem church in the basement, 2 hours late. This is before cell phones, so I couldn't tell them I was late. I couldn't reach anybody. I just got there as fast as I could. I walked down the stairs to this church basement, and it's very, very well lit with those big fluorescent lights, and there were 75 people there. They'd been waiting 2 hours for me.
Whoops.
They were all sitting there. Everybody there was African American. I was the only white person there. The man who organized it was, I don't know, telling jokes or something up in front. His name was Peter. He said, "Oh, here she is." And I walked up in front. I turned around and looked at these people. Every single face I could see. These beautiful African American people, just incredibly present. And I just started to cry. And I told them about our work in Africa. I got into the zone. And they soaked up every word. They were totally with me. And at a certain point, it was time at every fundraiser where you ask for the money. This is a completely different setting, but I knew that was the job. And so I asked for money. And there was sort of a silence, and it was still raining outside. So there was, the sound of rain, but there were also buckets placed around the room to catch the leaks because it was a leaky basement. So at a certain point, after I made the request, and there was the silence except for the sound of the rain and the drip, drip, drip in the buckets, an elderly Black woman stood up, and she was very thin and quite regal looking. She had gray hair parted in the middle of her forehead, and there was a tiny bun on the back of her neck, and she had on a raincoat, and underneath it you could see she had on a maid's uniform, an old-fashioned maid's uniform, kind of gray with a white collar. And then she had this leather purse on her arm. And she stood up and she was so dignified, and she said, "I want to tell you something, young lady." She looked at me and she said, "Money is just like water. It flows through every life. And for some people, it flows through like a rushing river. Other people like me, it comes through like a little tiny trickle. But it's a carrier. It's innocent. When you move it towards where it needs to go, it purifies, it cleanses, it makes things grow. But when it's hoarded or held, just like water, it makes people sick. It becomes stagnant and toxic, and they can't see the world any longer. All they can see is what they're holding on to."
Yeah.
But I have a little trickle running through my life. and I'm going to give it to you because I wanted to do the most good for the most folks. And she took $50 out of her purse in ones and fives and coins and tens. And she walked up this aisle, and I was crying by then. And she handed me her $50. And I had the briefcase with the $50,000 check on the table next to me. And it was face down on the bottom of my briefcase. And I remember taking her $50 and putting it on top of the $50,000. And she embraced me, and she was teary, and we were so moved by what she had said. And then every single person, 100% of those 75 people, stood behind her and made a line. And
Wow.
one by one, they gave me $5, $7, $16, $22. And I put it in my briefcase. We were all, then by the time that everybody had done that, they started to sing. It was so glorious. And then I went home. And I got to tell the whole story, sorry. But the next part is really important. I got back to my hotel. I put the $50,000 check on the bed. I put the $637.33 that I had collected in cash from this incredible group of beautiful people. And I thought, which is more powerful for the ending of world hunger? And I chose the $637.33, and I sent the $50,000 check back
Wow.
to the CEO with a letter saying, when you and your company are committed to ending world hunger, we would welcome your contribution, but our work is about commitment and for committed partners. And I know I didn't call my office. I didn't tell anybody.
I was going to be fired maybe for that. Oh, you gave back what?
Yeah. And but the PS here is 2 years later, I was in my office in San Francisco, and I got a handwritten letter from the CEO of the food company. And he said, I never forgot the return of that check, and it really rocked my world. And I started paying attention as the CEO of the largest food company on earth to the hunger issue. We really had never addressed it. And I retired at the end of that year, and I started watching the progress of your organization, the Hunger Project. And I got a nice golden parachute, as we do in our field. And I would like to know if you would accept my personal contribution with my commitment to join you in the fight to end world hunger for $250,000, which is now enclosed.
Very
and
nice.
I absolutely did accept his money. And I tell you that because so that's the story that had me realize money is a carrier. It can carry greed and envy, and it can crush and flood and destroy and infect with disease. Or it can purify, it can make things grow, it can cleanse. And if we think of it as water, or like blood, when it clots, it can kill. When water is held and hoarded, it doesn't mean people shouldn't save and shouldn't invest. But when we stop the flow for our own greed, it starts to make us sick. And so we can cleanse money. We can launder it when it comes through. We can forgive it for its past transgressions, but it's innocent. And if we allow money to nourish us and then flow onward to the most good for the world, that's really what fundraising is, I think. I say sacred work to reallocate the world's resources away from fear and towards love. So that's my long answer to your question about water and money.
You got two questions answered in one there on that story. So thank you for sharing that. Before we move on to kind of your next steps in your life, where do you think we are as a society as far as giving? And, you mentioned the flow of money, and from the stats that I've looked at, Americans tend to be the most philanthropic country in the world. And there's a number of very wealthy people who are, not all, of course, but a number who are giving substantial portions of their wealth to hopefully good causes. Do you have any comments about where we are as a society?
Yes, I do. I really appreciate that question. Well, yes, we're the most generous population on earth. We continue to be. We really invented philanthropy at the beginning of the 20th century. The 21st century philanthropy is transforming now. Impact investing, really looking at how we can make money and make a difference at the same time, is becoming more and more powerful. That sector of socially responsible, it's sometimes called impact investing. There's many names, and they get more and more accurate. Also, there's real powerful trend in having people be more engaged with their philanthropic dollars, so that they pay more attention to really getting involved personally. But an interesting statistic is that it's still kind of mind-boggling that of the hundreds of billions of dollars of charitable contributions given in the United States, or nonprofit, you could say, only it's 4% that comes from corporations. Only 4% of the hundreds of billions of dollars comes from corporations. I say they have very deep pockets, but very short arms. And then only another 6% comes from foundations. Only 6%. That's the Gates Foundation. That's the big foundations. And people with enormous wealth, for the most part, have foundations. But only 6% of that money comes from people who have foundations or foundations. The rest of it, which is kind of amazing, upwards of 85, 89% comes from individuals, and 75% of that comes from people who make less than $150,000 a year. So the biggest portion of philanthropy in the United States at this time, and will probably continue to be, people with less money give way more in terms of numbers and in terms of percentage. And it's just incredible. So even with the huge gifts of the very, very generous Giving Pledge people that Bill Gates and Warren Buffett have gone to see,
right,
those statistics still, the little individual, the people listening to this show, this podcast, people like you and me, or people who are not really fabulously wealthy, we still carry the lion's share of the philanthropy in the United States and in the world. So it's incredible, and I love that. I love that. People like Gertrude, like the lady in the church.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, good stats there. So let's shift to you a little bit as we wrap this up. Then, like, what are you most proud of in your life, Lynne?
Oh gosh,
it's a big one. What comes to mind?
Well, I don't think I can say one. If I said one thing, it's that I've lived a committed life, a life that's really devoted to making a difference with my time, with my energy, with my money, with my love. Mm-hmm. And that would be one way to talk about the answer. The work I did on ending world hunger, I can say in very specific terms. When we began the Hunger Project in 1977, the population of the planet was 4.3 billion people, 4.3 billion, and it's now 7.6 billion. When it was 4.3 billion people, the deaths from hunger and starvation at that time, 1977, were 44,000 people a day, 44,000 people a day, mostly children under 5. Now, all these years later, the planet has way more people, 7.6 billion people, and the deaths from hunger, malnutrition, and starvation have gone down to 16,000 a day. Way too many still, but that is a huge drop.
Yeah,
from 44,000 to 16,000 on a planet that has way more people. So we are we being the human family, on a trajectory to actually end society-wide hunger by 2030. And I will be enormously proud of that accomplishment, that I had that I made a contribution to that. Obviously, millions of people are involved in, most of all the hungry people themselves, in that outcome. So I'm very proud of that. And I'm also very proud of the work we do in the Amazon with the Pachamama Alliance. Pachamama means Mother Earth, and it's an alliance between indigenous peoples of the Amazon and conscious, committed people in the modern world like you and me for the sustainability of life. And in the last 25 years, since we started Pachamama Alliance, the sacred headwaters region of the Amazon, particularly in Ecuador and northern Peru, has remained pristine, almost completely roadless. We've empowered several tribes, but now 18 tribes, to keep out oil company after oil company after oil company, mining company after mining company after mining company, from getting in there. And it's roadless and pristine, and it is the most important ecosystem on Earth because it sources the whole Amazon, which is both the hydrological system of the planet and the lungs of the planet, along with the ocean. So that's a huge accomplishment, and we need to keep it that way.
Perfect. How do you see your legacy? Do you think about this much, or like what would your legacy? What would you want to leave behind as a legacy for your life?
Well, we have children and grandchildren, and they're our best legacy because they're very, very good people and they're up to great things. I would say right now, because we're so deeply engaged in the Amazon, the protection, the permanent protected status of the Amazon sacred headwaters of the rainforest would be an incredible legacy. There is no such category on Earth now called permanent protected status of any ecosystem. And given that that ecosystem is the source, the largest water source on Earth, the source of the most biodiverse ecosystem on Earth, the source of what's called the flying rivers, which is the source of our rain machine on the planet. If we can actually accomplish putting that part of the world, 100 million acres, managed by 18 tribes, in permanent protected status, that would never be touched, no matter what governments are elected in Peru and Ecuador, that would begin a process of permanent protected status on this planet that would be appropriate for the 21st, 22nd, and the centuries that follow. And if we can accomplish it in the Amazon, I think it will begin a process worldwide. So that would be a legacy I would be very proud of.
Sounds good. Well, Lynne, thank you so much for coming by and chatting a little bit. As we wrap this up, do you have any parting words you want to share? And then where can people find out more about you? And we will have some links on this page, of course, but maybe you want to verbally share that as well.
Well, the Soul of Money Institute is at soulofmoney.org. The Soul of Money book is available on Amazon and every other place you can buy books. The Pachamama Alliance, Pachamama Alliance, is pachamama.org, O-R-G. And on Pachamama Alliance website, we have trips to the rainforest, really incredible immersions into the natural world through Pachamama Alliance's relationship with the Achuar and the Shuar and the Shiwiyar and the Zapper people, just amazing trips. We also have something called the Awakener. The Awakener is a 2-hour program designed for companies, churches, people to awaken from the trance we're in and really be one of the people on this planet working to create an environmentally sustainable, spiritually fulfilling, socially just human presence on this planet. So pachamama.org, look up the Awakener or Awakening the Dreamer. And we have a whole series of educational programs called Game Changer Intensive and Drawdown and all kinds of cool stuff. And then I would just also say that I think it's important for me to say that I work with the Nobel Women Peace Prize laureates on empowering women and girls worldwide. And that website is nobelwomensinitiative.org. So those are 3 places where you can find me and the things I do, but mostly you can find yourself and the role you can play in turning the tide with the environment, with social justice, with empowering women, and with ending world hunger. The hungerproject.org. I didn't say that. That's another place where you could make a difference. And then my final words would be, I think one of the most beautiful things about being alive at this time in history is that the choices we make, and we're aware of it, the choices we make every single day impact the future of life for the next 1,000 years. And, previous generations didn't know that, but we know it. And rather than that being a burden, it's a glorious thing to know that your life makes that kind of a difference. And it ennobles your life. It ennobles the little decisions we make every day. It allows us to step out of our little lives starring ourselves, kind of like, and really be the ancestors of a future that we all want to have for the people who follow us. So that's what I'd like people to remember.
Very good. Very good. Well, beautifully said. And thank you for spending some time here, sharing your stories and some information about money. We heard a great story on fundraising and then really what you're up to, which is you have your hat on a lot of things right now. And that's great, right? It's exciting for you, I'm sure. And That's awesome that you're taking such action. So we'll link up all of those things on the page here for people listening as well. So, all right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed this conversation with Lynne Twist. Feel free to check out the page and reach out to her through the links and resources that she mentioned. And we'll talk to everybody on the next one. Take care.
Thank you so much.